This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 592 for February 2nd, 2021. Coming up on today's show, how do you like to bond? That's coming up on today's show. Hey everybody, I'm your host Minx. In case you're tuning in for the first time, this is an adult show about really lascivious things like honesty and communication, about sex and relationships. So if you're under 18, please stop listening and visit scarletteen.com. Now, I just want to clarify with the title of today's show, this is not about bondage, not about BDSM. This is about bonding, as in, how do you like to form bonds within your relationships? What do your configurations tend to look like? And that is going to be a lovely interview with friend of Poly Weekly, Dr. Eli Sheff. And that'll be coming up in just a minute. So how am I doing this week? Well, I have to admit that last week was a little bit rough. If you follow me on Facebook, you know that, the menopause was beating the shit out of me. I'd actually been on hormones for a while and everything was just peachy keen until it wasn't. And then I started realizing that I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up really hot and throwing the covers off me, and I kept thinking it was like seasonal affective disorder, that I was just feeling lethargic, unmotivated. I usually feel that way in January, February, so it was nothing new. And then I had realized, oh, wait a second, you've been waking up in the middle of the night frequently. And I checked my Fitbit sleep tracker and realized that it's because I was getting hot flashes, which meant that my medication wasn't working as well as it had been in the past. So good news is that I have fantastic health coverage. And so I was able to get in very quickly to see my gynecologist, and she did recommending upping the dose on one of my medications. So we are now, 4 or 5 days later, and I feel like a human being again. I am able to wake up in the morning and, with a little shower and time to wake up, I can actually get dressed and put on makeup and put on matching cute clothes like I usually do and actually be excited about my workday. And that was not the case before. That week that I was down, I seriously wasn't able to get out of bed. Like, I would wake up and sit up in bed and grab my laptop and start working, make sure that the privacy screen was on my camera, so I never actually appeared in any of my online meetings. And really, I was just holding it together. I mean, I am amazed at the work I was able to do considering how awful I felt. But yay, thank goodness for modern living through chemistry. And it actually gave me a chance to reach out to Heather Corinna, whom you may know from scarletteen.com. We mention her and her work in the intro for our podcast. She's also got a new book out on menopause called, quite appropriately, What Fresh Hell Is This? And I'm working to see if we can bring her on the show at one point, because highly relevant to me, and I'm probably not the only one. Well, times, they are a-changing. I was really excited to read in Alan's Poly in the News blog that Chris Smith, who we've had on the show, and Ben Schenker have proposed legislation to the Washington, D.C. City Council that would expand domestic partnership and anti-discrimination laws to include multi-partnered relationships. That's us! Their proposal is called the Right to Family Amendment Act of 2021, and there's a committee hearing taking place on March 5th. I'll provide a link in the show notes as to how you can participate if you're so inclined. Our next news item, you may recall from past shows that we have talked about Amy Dickinson. She's one of America's most read newspaper advice columnists, and generally she's not too receptive to the idea of polyamory and open relationships when people write in about them. However, in a recent column called Ask Amy, Polyamory Creates an Extra Family Challenge, she actually gives pretty good advice. There's an elderly woman who is just positively aghast. that her son and daughter-in-law came out to her about being poly and are asking that their other partners be accepted by the family. And guess who she quotes in her response? Coincidentally, Dr. Eli Sheff, whom we're going to hear from in just about 2 or 3 minutes. That's right. Amy seems to have come closer to accepting polyamory in this particular column. She recommends getting to know the new partner first outside of large family gatherings, and that she educates herself about non-monogamy and to be patient while adjusting to the new configuration. I call that a pretty big win. I think that's really cool. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, just call us at 802-505-POLY and leave us a voicemail, or you can email polyweekly@gmail.com and attach an MP3 file with your questions. If you'd like to book us for your online meeting or basically anything that involves a calendar, you can email lustyguy@polyweekly.com. I am very excited to welcome back to the show Elisabeth Sheff. Welcome back.
Hi, Minx. Thanks so much for having me back on.
For those who may be listening for the first time, you're in for a treat. Dr. Elisabeth, also known as Dr. Eli Sheff, is a researcher, expert witness, coach, speaker, and educational consultant. She has a PhD in sociology from the University of Colorado Boulder and certification as a sexuality educator from the AASECT. That's the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. She specializes in gender and sexual minority families, consensual non-monogamy, and kink and BDSM. She is the foremost academic expert on polyamorous families with children, and her 20-plus year Polyamorous Family Study is the only longitudinal study of poly families with children to date. Welcome back.
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
So I have to ask you, how are you doing during the pandemic? It's been almost a year that we have basically been working from home and wearing masks everywhere. How are you doing?
At first, I was loving it, and now it kind of sucks. Especially the second half of 2020 was very difficult for me. I had a terrible second half of 2020, and so I'm really looking forward to hopefully things changing soon.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to having the vaccine and perhaps having a new administration. And
yes.
I fear that the road back to normal will not be next month, but next year, as in 2022 at the earliest. But
right.
Hopefully it will be better than 2020.
Yes, please.
Yeah. On to less dreary things. You have a couple of new projects. The Bonding Project, and you've got a new book about children in polyamorous families. So let's kick it off. What is the Bonding Project?
The Bonding Project is something that my colleague Jess Wise came up with, and she approached me about it probably 4 years ago, and then we tried to do something, but it wasn't until we added our other 2 team members who were freed up by the pandemic, actually. When everybody was stuck at home, we were like, hey, let's all work on this together. So the Bonding Project is a test about relationships. How do people like to bond? And while most, I would say, relationship tests are kind of oriented around monogamy, this test is pretty different from that. It doesn't take any single relationship form as central or most important. It treats them all kind of equally, basically. So when we were thinking about how might people organize their relationships, we realized they might bond one-to-one, just prefer one other person. They might bond one-to-many, meaning they might like to date multiple people or have romantic relationships with some and other kinds of relationships with others, but they weren't necessarily focused on primarily or solely relating to one significant other. Or people might bond many to many, more of a group relationship, what people think of as, for instance, a quad or a triad, where people prioritize the kind of group relationship, that has a life of its own. And they also might bond as solo people, either not wanting to be defined by a romantic relationship, and so kind of including sexuality and romance on the same level as friendship and not kind of having sexuality set above. Or some solo bonders don't want to have sex at all. They're not interested in dating. They're not interested in romance. Maybe they want to have sex, but not fall in love. Maybe they want to fall in love, but not have sex. Solo bonders are pretty diverse, actually. So we came up with this test after many different tries and iterations, tried it on each other, fixed it, tried it on other people, fixed it again. So what we're in is actually probably the 4th or 5th iteration, but we're calling it beta because it's really only the 2nd version that we've released to more than just us.
It sounds like it's a diagnostic tool then for determining relationship preference. Is that right?
I wouldn't call it a diagnostic tool because it's not as proscriptive. It's not as, this is what you are in this little box and we have one answer for you. It gives a range, actually, of how comfortable, curious, cautious, or challenged people are in relationship to each one of those relationship styles. So people who are comfortable with one-on-one bonding, for instance, feel like that feels most at home for them. Whereas for some other people, one-on-one bonding with that expectation of exclusivity does not feel comfortable. That would feel challenging. People who are curious about anything think, that could be interesting. I haven't tried that. I haven't done that. Maybe, is that something I want to do? I don't know. And people who are cautious would be like, I haven't done that, but that really doesn't sound very good to me. And I probably would not want to do that unless under some pretty specific circumstances, but really not down with that, actually. And then people who are challenged by any one of the relationship styles are like, no, that's not going to work for me. That sounds bad. I don't want to do that. No, that doesn't sound good to me at all.
Well, I do like some alliteration, so I like that. I have to wonder, though, don't people already know what they want?
Oh, that's such a good question. And Minx, I absolutely believe that you do. Yes. But I would say there are lots of people who are questioning. They're just not sure. Maybe they've never tried it. They don't know. I think young people who are just verging into dating would be interested in this. I think people who are, for instance, coming out of a long-term relationship and are thinking, all right, that one didn't work. What do I think I might prefer in the future? I don't know. Would I want to do this? People who've just gotten together and are trying to figure out what they want from each other. Taking this test could be a great way to start a conversation. I guess that's why I don't see it as a prescriptive tool. It definitely is a tool, but rather than providing a narrow definition, it's a better way to start a complicated conversation in terms of how it felt to take the test, what you thought about the questions, what your results were. Where do you feel like there's some wiggle room? Where are you certain that is either will or will not work for you? And besides, it's fun. It only takes 10 minutes. And I think it's fun to take the test. So I think it also could be just for bored people who are like, what does this test say about me?
I like the idea that it's something fun that you can do on a date, right? Or before a date.
Yes.
Or, maybe on the second or third date. That I know it's hard to come up with good get-to-know-you questions on dates. We've talked about this before. Like, I always hate when people ask, So do you like movies? And I'm like, no, I actually don't like movies. What music do you listen to? Well, I only listen to show tunes, dude. So it's going to go nowhere. The questions that most people ask on dates, I have really boring answers to. But I like that this is an activity that you could do together. And it also kind of shows the other person's level of self-awareness.
I love that, Minx. That never occurred. Maybe because I don't date. It wouldn't have occurred to me. But definitely one of my colleagues who helped develop the test has it on her dating profile and is like, if you want to go out with me, take this first and then let me know what your results were. And then we'll talk about it.
I like that. It's kind of like my user manual. I actually never intended for my user manual to be something that people read before they went on a date with me. It was more for my own self-awareness so I could better express who I am and what I want in a concise manner when I am dating or when I'm in a relationship. And it just coincidentally ended up being a really good tool for dating. And it just happened to be that lustyguy happened to find it and read it before our first date, unbeknownst to me. So I like that it kind of works along those lines.
Good job, lustyguy.
Great job, lustyguy. So let's talk about your other project. You have a new book, Children in Polyamorous Families. Talk to me about that.
Yes, this is a really short book. It's very much for lay readers. It's not academic at all. It's a very short, little concise discussion of, how do children of polyamorous families fare? And I'm still working on the research heavy book that will come out. I was thinking 2022. I think it's probably more likely going to be 2023. But I felt like my research findings to this point were so clear. And, the book I wrote before on When Someone You Love is Polyamorous, people really enjoyed that book and felt like it was nice to have a tool to give to someone to say, look, here's the scoop on polyamory. Let's talk once you read it. This is exactly that same thing for anyone who has the question like, oh, so what about the children? What does this do to the children? Which obviously underlying that question is the assumption that it messes them up, which my research actually indicates it's the opposite. Polyfamilies aren't perfect, but they provide their children with a lot of emotional sophistication, a lot of tools for relationship resilience, regardless of what form their children's relationships take. Often they're great at friendship and maintaining long-term chosen family relationships, using the tools they learned from their polyamorous parents in terms of how to ask for what you want and listen to what other people want and figure out how to agree on how to meet each other's needs and how to tell the truth and how to establish emotional intimacy. So those, I think, are the skills that stand out as special from polyamorous families. Also the practical things that are good about polyamorous families for kids is a much wider social safety net in terms of more adults to rely on, not only as children, but as tweens and teens and young adults. They maintain these family relationships. Not that they think of these, their parents' partners as parents. They're not often viewing them that way. More often, it's like an auntie or an uncle or something, or a close family friend, like a cousin or something, but not necessarily a full-on parent.
That's really interesting. I have to admit that I was really hoping that this would be an academic book presenting research because we so need that. I'm so tired of but what about the children?
Yeah, that's coming. And this is actually very much based on research. It's a summary of findings.
Exactly. And I love that because I think it's a great way. That's what most people really want. I mean, I personally love to have data points that I can pull out and use, but I think that summary is going to be helpful, as you say, for most people who are kind of new to the idea. So I'm so glad that you're publishing this. I was actually kind of curious, though. Do you have any information on how many children of poly families opt to be monogamous?
I don't have a numerical breakdown, in part because we don't really know how many children in polyamorous families there are. But from my sample, I would say that several, probably at least 4, were solidly on the side of monogamy. Definitely not interested in having, probably even more than that. Let me think about it. Okay, so 6 at least occurred to me.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just curious, though, because people think that the kids are indoctrinated and they think it's the only way to perceive relationships. And I think that's one of the fears, I guess, that, polys are going to take over the world or something. But I think that's really more what monogamists do. Going back to that argument that people accuse us of doing things that they themselves are doing. I asked because I have anecdotally heard and know a couple of monogamous kids of poly parents. They just decided that, monogamy was right for them. And of course, their parents supported them in that.
Absolutely. And all of the kids in my sample say that their parents support them regardless, whatever choices they make, that the parents aren't pushing non-monogamy on them. Some of the kids feel like polyamory, in fact, is too restrictive and that they would definitely opt for relationship anarchy. Others
There's certainly a lot of gatekeepers for polyamory, so I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yes. Others feel that, monogamy, like several of them are monogamously married now. But I would say the bulk are in the middle saying, who knows, not right now. Either they're too young to decide that, how many 15-year-olds are certain what kind of relationship they want, or they're with someone right now. Several people said that they were in an exclusive relationship right now, but they would have to just see what happened in the future, what their partners wanted, what they wanted. So what's clear to me is that it's a choice on the menu. It's one of the relationship options they consider, but they do not feel like it's the only choice on the menu. They, of all generations, these young people, have such an extensive menu when it comes to sexuality and gender and relationships. It's, they really do not like to be boxed in by small definitions that say, all right, if you said once you were attracted to girls, then you have to forever be attracted to girls and only this kind of girl.
And it has to be more than boys, X% more.
Yes.
I really like that. It makes my heart sing because all I've ever really wanted is for polyamory to be an option, for people to realize it doesn't have to be monogamy or nothing. It doesn't have to be serial monogamy. It doesn't have to be marriage. And just have people realize that they have choices and they can choose what works best for them. That's really
Absolutely
great to hear. I also love the idea that the additional adults in the family are more as not parental figures, but as you say, confidants, aunt or uncle. And I can only imagine what my life would have been like if my parents had had a poly family and I had had other people to confide in. Because as it was, I didn't really have any adult that I was really close to when I was growing up. And how cool would it have been to have a cool poly aunt? I think that would have been awesome.
That you could ask questions to or go to for advice or just support when, sometimes kids don't want to talk to their parents about something. Not even that they hate their parents or won't ever talk to them about anything, but that they're just not at all comfortable with that thing in that moment.
Or even just be heard and seen, because parents are often very busy and sometimes your maiden aunt has a little bit more time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm
and fresh energy for the kid. Yeah. They're not as wiped out.
Exactly. Well, that sounds absolutely wonderful. And I'm wondering if some of the folks in that study have used the bonding project to figure out which type of relationship might be best for them.
Oh, that's a great idea. You know, I haven't really cross-pollinated that, told the study folks about the bonding project. It's been kind of a separate thing, but now that you mention it, those kids might be interested in it.
They actually might be able to give you some really good feedback too, now that I think about it. Yeah. Because they're younger.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, Minx, that, you know, in terms of people, you know what kind of relationship you want. That's probably why I hadn't brought it up with my study participants, because they're very long-term polyamorous. The parents of that generation, just like you, Minx, they know what they want. They're not confused at all, or they're not wondering. They're not at a transition point generally. They figured it out and they're making it work. But I definitely could see the younger kids being like, could I deal with many to many? Would I prefer solo? I am not sure.
And Dr. Eli, you have the dubious honor of being the first guest participant in our inaugural segment that I have currently dubbed Ranty Pants. There's so much going on in the world right now. We've added a politics segment to our show, and this is your opportunity to go on a rant about politics, if you like, or something related to the pandemic or the Oxford comma or anything else you like. So this is your Ranty Pants. What would you like to rant about?
I love the name Ranty Pants. That's adorable. You're so creative, Minx. I got to rant a little bit about people not wearing masks, especially in the South. I do not see at all the reasoning behind facial autonomy, as one of our, I think a senator from Tennessee, perhaps, might have said somehow. Facial autonomy, that is more important, you know, than keeping other people from dying from an airborne disease. I just really don't get it. And especially because these are a lot of the same people who are anti-choice. You know, their facial autonomy is more important than my life, but I better not want to have an abortion anywhere in Tennessee because that's not allowed. And you may still be able to get an abortion somewhere in Tennessee. I'm not sure, but they've made it incredibly difficult. So I don't understand why, if they're so concerned about life, why don't they wear a freaking mask?
That was a fantastic rant. I love it.
Oh, that was nice. I got that off my chest. Thanks. Thanks, Minx. I'm feeling better.
That is what we're here for. That is awesome. Well, Dr. Eli, it's been so wonderful having you back on the show. And where can we find you online and access to your projects online?
The Bonding Project is at bondingproject.com. You can find my blogs on Psychology Today. I blog under the title of my first book, The Polyamorous Next Door. And you can find other things on my website at elisabethsheff.com.
And we'll also put links to those in our show notes, because I know it's really hard to hear letters spelled out, especially if English is not your first language. She's also on Twitter at twitter.com/Dr. Dr. Eli Sheff, and on Facebook also at Dr. Eli Sheff. And I'll put those links in the show notes along with your YouTube channel and all the other ways to get hold of you.
Wonderful. Thanks.
It has been so wonderful having you back on the show, and thank you so much for writing your book, for putting together the Bonding Project, and for future books that will come out in, what you said, 2023?
Probably 2024.
2024. Well, thanks in advance. It's been wonderful talking with you today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Minx. I really appreciate that.
If you'd like to talk with others about what you heard on today's podcast, you can join the community on Facebook at facebook.com/polyweekly or Twitter at polyweekly or at cunning.minx. I'm on Instagram at cunning.minx, and I've got one whole post up on TikTok as at cunning.minx. I tried an audiogram, didn't seem to go over too well. I'm not going to sing a sea shanty, so we'll see how that goes. Well, that about wraps it up for today's show. I want to thank all of our Poly Weekly Playmates for their generous donations. We are a free resource. We've helped hundreds of thousands of people navigate their introduction to and continued success with polyamory and other brands of non-monogamy. We're not exclusive. And your donations help keep the podcast free for everybody both inside and outside the community. If donating isn't your thing, then you can still help us out by writing a review on Apple Podcasts or sharing this podcast with your friends. That being said, thanks for listening, and remember, it's not all about the sex.